I was surprised to discover that my eldest sister in the manor was also a transmigrator. At 17, she rejected the marriage proposal from the Grand Secretary's eldest son, declaring she wanted one lifetime, one couple, forever. The entire capital said she had gone mad. Only I knew that she, like me, had transmigrated here. 3 years ago, when I transmigrated into the concubine-born daughter of the Shen family, I noticed this legitimate elder sister behaved very strangely. She forced the accountants to use Arabic numerals and even pushed our father to establish a school for women. It wasn't tea until she mumbled in her cups, 996 is going to kill me, that I confirmed she was a fellow transmigrator. On the day my eldest sister, Shen Zhao, got married, her 10-mile bridal dowry lined the streets of Shengjing.
Ah Yun, trust me. I will surely choose a husband for you who is better than young Master Shi.
Choose a better one. He handed my birth chart to the Song family.
Ayun, I have looked through all the men in the capital. The young Marquis Song doesn't even have a bedchamber maid. He is the cleanest of all.
I listened to my sister's advice and married Song Mingxuan. On our wedding night, Song Mingxuan held my hand and said to me,
Ayun, you are the only one for me in this lifetime.
After 1 year of marriage, I happened to rescue a girl from Zuishang Pavilion. She told me that Song Mingxuan kept a mistress at Zuishang Pavilion and had done so for 3 years. On the night of the 7th, the rain fell suddenly and heavily. Holding an oil paper umbrella, I rushed to Zuxiang Pavilion. In the warm yellow candlelight, Song Mingxuan was holding a woman's hand, teaching her how to write. A 3-year-old child lay across his knees, nibbling on a sugar doll. His usually cold and stern eyes were curved like crescent moons.
Ruyan, look. The word home should be written like this.
The child suddenly pounced onto the Xuan paper, his sticky sugar-coated little hand leaving a crooked smudge of ink.
Daddy is silly. We need to draw 3 little people holding hands.
The woman playfully pinched the child's ear in mock anger, only to be pulled into Song Mingxuan's arms with a laugh. He rested his chin on the crown of her head, rubbing gently.
All right, we'll do whatever our treasure says. Tomorrow, I will take you both to the villa in the western suburbs to paint a family portrait.
Supporting myself against a pillar, I slowly squatted down. So, the days he took leave every month to patrol the military camp were actually spent here, playing the part of a loving husband and father. I returned to the manor, completely lost in thought, utterly unaware that I was soaked to the skin. When Song Yushuan returned and saw my distracted state, he took a handkerchief to dry my wet hair. His tone was gentle.
How did you get so drenched?
What if you catch a cold? I spoke coldly. What if I do catch a cold? You probably wish I would fall ill and die sooner.
My lady, what do you mean by this?
I questioned him hoarsely. Song Yushuan, since when do you have a 3-year-old child? The mutton-fat jade inkstone crashed to the ground. For a split second, panic flashed in his eyes as he looked up.
Ayun, listen to me. That night when I was 16, I drank too much.
And so you remained drunk for 3 or 4 years? So drunk that the child already knows how to call you father. Song Yushuan, I find you disgusting. His expression suddenly changed.
Did you go to Zushang Pavilion today, my lady? Then did you happen to see the swallow's nest under the eaves of the east wing? When the fledglings are starving and freezing, the mother swallow would even peck her own bones to pieces to feed them. Ayun, you are the kindest woman in this world. You wouldn't have the heart to watch their mother and son wander the streets, would you?
What a touching display of fatherly love. Only, young Marquis Song, do not forget. How did you denounce those who favor concubines over wives in your academy essays back then?
The innocent child is blameless. If you can allow them into the manor, I promise.
Promise what? Make another oath like the one where you swore never to take another woman? Song Yushuan's fingers dug so hard into my wrist that it nearly bruised the bone.
Ayun, we have been together day and night for this past year. Is that still not enough to prove my sincerity?
I flung his hand off violently. Sincerity? The timing of your visits to Zuxiang Pavilion on the 7th of every month is more punctual than the morning court drums. How dare you speak of sincerity to me? Song Yushuan's face turned deathly pale. He took half a step back, bumping into the screen. Get out. I smashed the teacup. The rain was still falling. I stared at my wet hair in the bronze mirror. I suddenly remembered the day of our wedding, when he lifted my bridal veil. His fingertips were trembling. He said that the 2 locks of hair cut when we became husband and wife are still locked in the bottom of the jewelry box. In a fit of anger, I went back to find my older sister.
Second miss, the eldest miss has arrived.
Before the maid could finish speaking, Shen Zhao had already lifted the curtain and entered. Sister, she said, gathering my ice-cold hands into her palms.
Drink some ginger soup first.
The rising steam made my eyes smart and sour. I stared at the rippling soup. Song Yushuan said he wants to bring that mother and child into the manor.
Did you agree?
I said I want a divorce. Shen Zhao suddenly let out a soft laugh.
3 years ago, I refused the marriage proposal from the Grand Secretary's eldest son. The memorials of impeachment from the Ministry of Rights could have covered the entire capital. Guess what father said? He said the daughters of the Shen family would rather break than bend.
Suddenly, there was a knock on the window lattice. Song Mingxuan's voice drifted and mingled with the sound of the rain.
Yun, will you let me in to say a few words?
Shen Zhao pressed down on my trembling shoulders and said aloud,
The night is deep and the dew is heavy. Please return, young Marquis.
Sister, the wooden door creaked. Song Mingxuan actually knelt straight down before the steps.
Yun and I are husband and wife, after all. With you blocking us like this.
Shen Zhao suddenly pushed the door open.
Husband and wife, how long has it been since you and Yun drank the nuptial wine? And already you are thinking of stuffing people into your chambers.
Song Mingxuan kept his back perfectly straight.
The innocent child is blameless. Ruyan is also a pitiful person. Yun has always been kind-hearted.
What a kind heart. Let me ask you this. If it were Yun who had raised an illegitimate child outside today, would you be willing to bring that bastard back to raise as your legitimate heir?
He was choked up, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down.
How can these two things be compared?
I supported myself against the doorframe and stood up. Why can't they? Just because I am a woman? Just because I am a woman, Song Mingxuan? In the treatise on equalizing wives and concubines you wrote at the Imperial Academy, you said that if the line between legitimate and illegitimate is blurred, the family and state will be in chaos. Now, you want to personally disrupt this order of legitimacy? The lantern under the eaves swayed wildly in the wind. Light and shadow flickered across his face.
Yun, I know you feel wronged, but Bauer can already recite the 1,000-character classic. He must have a proper status.
I sneered. A proper status? When you begged to marry me, why didn't you mention this status? The ink on the marriage certificate enshrined in the Song family ancestral hall is not yet dry. Yet you expect us daughters of the Shen family to act like the bodhisattvas in the temples. Clay figures with gilded bodies at everyone's beck and call. A weak, delicate female voice drifted over from the moon gate. Madame Lu Ruyan knelt in the rain, pulling her child along with her. Her thin spring dress clung tightly to her protruding lower abdomen.
Every single mistake is this concubine's fault. But Bauer had a fever the day before yesterday, and even in his dreams, he was crying out for his father.
My pupils contracted suddenly. You're pregnant. Song Mingxuan hurriedly got up to support Lu Ruyan.
It was only diagnosed 3 months ago.
Looking at his hand protectively resting on that woman's waist, my heart instantly turned to ash. Song Mingxuan, didn't you say you only had a child with Lu Ruyan because you were young and foolish? Where did the child in her belly come from this time? He turned his head.
Yun, you have always been the most sensible. If Ruyan's child is another boy, he will be registered under your name.
I grabbed the teacup from the table and hurled it at him. The teacup shattered into pieces. I don't need a child you had with an outside woman to call me mother. The child Lu Ruyan was holding suddenly burst into loud, wailing tears.
Bad woman, you're bullying my mommy.
Looking at the crying and screaming child, I suddenly found it absurd. Even though I am someone from 1,000 years in the future, I still couldn't escape this kind of sordid drama. I took off the jade bracelet on my wrist and threw it in front of him. This was the birthday gift he gave me last year. Song Mingxuan, take your Ruyan and Bauer and get out through the side door.
Yun, if you don't leave,
I will turn your story into a play and have it performed in every tea house in the capital every single day. Before the sky was fully bright, hurried footsteps came from outside. Chuntao knocked on the door with a sob in her voice.
Madam, Miss Liu is kneeling at the main gate, kowtowing. The bluestone path is covered in bloodstains.
The bronze mirror reflected the dark circles under my eyes. If she wants to kneel, let her kneel. Go and bolt the side door shut. But the marquise, before Shen Zhao could finish speaking, the carved wooden door was kicked open with a loud bang. Song Mingxuan rushed in, covered in the morning dew.
Shen Yun, Ruyan is 3 months pregnant, yet you actually let her kneel in the freezing dew.
Your words are laughable, Marquise. What did I say when I threw you out of the manor last night? Who would have known that Lu Ruyan would come to kneel at the gates of the Shen manor?
When did you become so malicious?
He swept his hand across the dressing table, smashing the rouge box.
Where is the compassion you showed when handing out porridge to beggars at Hugo Temple?
I stared at his features, twisted in a violent rage, and suddenly burst out laughing. It is because I was too merciful that I allowed Lu Ruyan to ride roughshod over me. Suddenly, a child's sharp crying and screaming rang out from outside. Lu Ruyan's pitiful voice pierced through the doors.
Don't be afraid, Bauer. Mother will get justice for you.
Listen to that. What did a 3-year-old child do wrong to suffer such humiliation? Shen Yun, if you hate me, take it out on me.
Song Mingxuan grabbed my wrist and dragged me toward the door. At the corner of the veranda, we ran into Shen Zhao, who had rushed over. She shielded me behind her and pointed right at the space between Song Mingxuan's brows.
Is the young marquis planning to beat his primary wife in the middle of the street?
Song Mingxuan released his grip and sneered. Sister, you've come at just the right time.
Take a look at the fine daughter your Shen family has raised. She would even harm an unborn child.
Shen Zhao caressed the red mark on my wrist.
I should be the one asking you that, young marquis. When you were taught the Book of Rights back then, did no one teach you the principles of self-cultivation and managing a household? Splashing the dirty water of favoring a concubine and destroying the wife onto the primary wife's head. The Song family's face is indeed thicker than the city walls.
The clamor outside grew louder. The faint cries of street vendors could be heard.
Quick look. The Marquise's wife is mistreating the mistress.
I gripped Shen Zhao's sleeve tightly, but she took my trembling fingertips in her hand instead and raised her voice.
Chen Tao, open the main gate.
The vermilion gates swung wide open with a crash. Li Ruyan was kneeling below the stone steps, holding her child. The blood stain on her forehead looked glaring in the morning light. Seeing us come out, she suddenly pulled open her collar, revealing her bruised neck and shoulders.
I begged the madam to grant us a way to live. Last night, the marquise merely spoke a word on my behalf. And you?
Shen Zhao slowly walked down the stone steps, her embroidered shoe stepping onto the hem of Lu Ruyan's skirt.
These wounds of yours look rather fresh, Miss Liu. Should we have the imperial physician examine whether they are whip wounds or painted on with rouge?
She bent down and pinched Lu Ruyan's chin.
Or should I have the maids strip off your clothes to see where the marquise's bite marks are?
Lu Ruyan's pupils shrank instantly. The child in her arms suddenly struggled and kicked at Shen Zhao.
Bad woman, don't you dare bully my mother.
Shen Zhao smiled.
Little darling, did your mother never teach you that offending a titled lady of the court gets your tongue cut out?
Lu Ruyan suddenly threw herself at Shen Zhao's feet, weeping and wailing.
Why must you push us so hard, madam? That concubine you in your own household, doesn't she also rely on General Shi's favor? Too.
Amidst the uproar of the crowd, Shen Zhao swayed slightly. Liu Ruyan shouted at me.
The 5th concubine General Shi took in last month. I heard she even snatched away the keys to the household accounts. But rest assured, madam, if I enter the marquise's manor, I will surely serve you and the marquis well, and will never overstep my bounds like concubine you did.
Shen Zhao's slap sent Lu Ruyan sprawling to the ground. I had never seen my sister lose her composure like this. Her fingernails dug deep into her palms, yet her voice carried a laugh.
Does a piece of trash like you deserve to discuss the private affairs of the Xi family?
Lu Ruyan clutched her bleeding cheek and shrieked with laughter.
Trash. Does the general's wife know where General Shi is at this very moment? He is holding concubine Yu in his arms, listening to the pipa at the South City Villa. Your joke about one lifetime, one couple, isn't it the laughing stock of the entire capital over tea?
I felt my sister's hand turn ice cold in an instant. She suddenly turned her head and stared at me, her eyes swirling with a look I knew all too well. The resentment and mockery of a transmigrator who had been battered black and blue by ancient society. I held her hand. Sister, don't be afraid. Yun will protect you. After the farce, Song Mingxuan left behind a message saying he would fetch his wife home in 3 days, then left with Lu Ruyan in his arms. Shen Zhao returned to the Shi residence. I was worried she would be depressed after hearing Lu Ruyan's words, so I chose a day to visit her. Never did I expect that she actually had thoughts of ending her own life. Fortunately, I discovered it in time and saved her. Shen Zhao's wrist was wrapped in blood-stained gauze. The candlelight cast a pale, sickly glow on her face. I slammed the medicine bowl heavily onto the table. If I hadn't come to visit you today, sister, would you really have thrown away your life for a faithless man? Sister, how could you do something so foolish as taking your own life? Shen Zhao's eyelashes fluttered slightly.
Do you know what concubine you did yesterday? She smashed the bracelet Shi Yun gave me. She said she needed to clear the storehouse to make room for her shoe brocades.
I pried open her tightly clenched palm, then smash her things back. We have seen how vast the world is. How can we let ourselves be bullied by them? Shen Zhao's eyes widened.
Yun, you are also.
Suddenly, a frantic knocking came from outside the door. Song Mingxuan's voice was hoarse, like a blunt knife.
Yun, come home with me.
Liu Ruyan's cloyingly sweet voice drifted in right after.
Please do not blame him, madam. The marquis has had no appetite for days. It breaks my heart to see him like this.
I flung the door open. I caught Liu Ruyan on her tiptoes, adjusting Song Mingxuan's collar. Her belly was already showing a slight curve. The physician said the day before yesterday that the pregnancy was very stable and she would surely carry on the marquis's lineage. I stared at her and said coldly, "Get out." Song Mingxuan suddenly grabbed my sleeve.
Yun, I know you have a temper, but Ruyan is now carrying the Song family's child.
I shook off his hand. What does that have to do with me? Has the Marquis forgotten? The divorce papers are still sitting in my vanity box. Liu Ruyan suddenly covered her face and sobbed.
It is all my fault. If Madam truly cannot tolerate me,
Shen Zhao leaned against the doorframe with a cold sneer.
Then take your bastard and jump into a well. It would be perfect to let the whole capital see how the Marquis of Zhongyang elevates a concubine and destroys his wife.
The veins on Song Mingxuan's temples bulged. He suddenly pulled a bright yellow scroll from his sleeve.
With the floods in Jiangnian right now, His Majesty is highly vexed. If he finds out about this trouble in the Marquis's household, I fear he will blame me for failing to manage my family. Yun, do you really want a divorce at a critical time like this?
The Jiangnian floods, I narrowed my eyes. I made up my mind and wasted no more words on him. Fine, I will go back with you. Before traveling through time, I was a hydraulic engineer. Song Mingxuan would certainly never expect that the day the Jiangnian floods are resolved will be the day we divorce. In the imperial study, wisps of blue smoke rose from the gilded beast-headed censer. I stared at the winding dragon patterns on the gray bricks, hearing my own voice calm to the point of being almost cold. If my method is followed, the floodwaters can be receded within 3 months, and there will be no risk of dike breaches for 5 years. The emperor caressed his jade archer's ring and chuckled.
Madam Song, you speak with great confidence.
I unfolded the river map, my fingertip pointing to the location marked in red. Has your majesty ever seen an anthill? What the Ministry of Works patches up every year is merely a festering sore. The real disease lies here. The riverbed is already 3 feet higher than the official road outside the city. The vermilion brush hovered over the memorial, hesitating to descend. Song Mingxuan suddenly emerged from behind the screen.
How can the words of a mere woman be taken seriously? Your Majesty, this subject is willing to personally go to Jiangnian.
I looked at Song Mingxuan's clenched fists. I suddenly recalled his face last night when he held Liu Ruyan and said that women belonged in the embroidery room. The vermilion brush paused on the memorial.
Lady Shen, I only ask you, what if you fail?
I knelt on the ground and kowtowed deeply. If I fail, this humble woman is willing to atone with her life. The vermilion brush descended, and I heard the young emperor chuckle. On the day the imperial decree arrived at the Marquis's manor, Liu Ruyan was supporting her waist, feeding koi fish under the corridor. Her fingertips deliberately brushed over her slightly protruding belly.
Madam runs to the Ministry of Works all day. Those who know would say it is for flood control, but those who don't might think it is a secret tryst.
I shook my hand, which was numb from the slap, watching her clutch her face and fall into the fish pond. Since Miss Liu knows I am the flood control envoy appointed by the imperial court, you should understand the crime of slandering a court official. When Song Mingxuan rushed over upon hearing the noise, I was unhurriedly wiping my hands with a silk handkerchief. You have arrived just in time, Lord Marquis. Your mistress just claimed that the Minister of Works and I are having an affair.
Ruyan would never be so insolent.
He bent down to pull up the soaking wet Liu Ruyan. I didn't bother to say more, returning to my room to change my clothes. Before heading to the palace to receive my reward, Song Mingxuan's carriage trailed 30 feet behind my sedan chair. Like an inescapable ghost, I lifted a corner of the sedan curtain and met his eager gaze as he pulled back his carriage curtain. He rode his horse close to the sedan window, his tone intimate.
Madam has performed meritorious service in flood control this time. Even His Majesty praised you as the virtuous helpmate of our Marquis's manor.
Once we returned to the manor, I snapped the bamboo curtain shut. Lord Marquis should go to Zhuxiang Pavilion to whisper such sweet nothings. The sound of the wheels rolling over the blue bricks suddenly faltered. The sound of horse hooves swirled in confusion. Song Mingxuan's voice came muffled through the brocade curtain.
Yun, I know you resent me, but do you really intend in front of His Majesty to—
I cut him off. Mind your words, Lord Marquis. Losing one's propriety before the emperor can cost one's head. Stepping down from the carriage, Song Mingxuan followed half a step behind me. His brocade boots were about to brush against the hem of my skirt. I deliberately stepped on his robe, listening to the crisp sound of tearing silk. Watch your step, Marquis. When the emperor set down his teacup, I was staring at the river map on his desk, marked with red ink.
Lady Shen, tell us what reward you desire.
Song Mingxuan hastily took half a step forward.
To ease your Majesty's worries, Azar, we are asking Lady Shen.
The emperor cut him off, making Song Mingxuan's Adam's apple bob in panic. I looked at the cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck and smiled faintly. This humble woman begs your majesty to grant a decree of divorce. Song Mingxuan spoke up in a panic.
No, my wife is joking.
He reached out to grab my wrist, but I coldly shook him off. Prostrating myself on the ground, I spoke with determination. The Marquis has fathered 2 children with a mistress. This humble woman cannot bear such humiliation. I beg your majesty to grant this wish. Song Mingxuan's knees slammed heavily onto the floor, beside me.
Yun, how can you take those rumors seriously?
Ruyan is merely, I turned to look at his bloodshot eyes, merely someone who serves you without fail on the 7th of every month, Marquis? Or does the Marquis wish to summon the imperial physicians to examine the child in Miss Lu's womb? The scent of ambergris suddenly became overwhelmingly strong. The emperor propped up his chin and chuckled softly.
Minister Song, the memorial you submitted last Mid-Autumn Festival stated that your wife is virtuous, and your concubine is respectful, and that your household is in perfect harmony.
Song Mingxuan pressed his forehead against the cold brick floor. This subject. I pulled out my gold hairpin and pricked my fingertip. Your Majesty, this humble woman wishes to make a covenant with her own blood, to sever all ties with the Marquis of Zhongyang's estate for the rest of my life. As the droplets of blood fell onto the white jade tiles, Song Mingxuan suddenly lunged forward and grabbed my shoulders.
You said we were bound as husband and wife. You said we would grow old together.
I looked at his contorted features and laughed out loud. Show some self-respect, Marquis. When you held Lu Ruyan in your arms and taught her how to write the character for family, did you ever think of our sacred bond?
That was nothing but a passing amusement. Lu Ruyan cannot even compare to a single strand of your hair. Why can't you understand?
I pried his trembling fingers off me. I understand. I understand that the grand principles you memorized at the Imperial Academy were thrown to the dogs. I understand that when you promised me a lifetime of devotion, you already had a mistress. And I understand even better that you are stopping me now, only because you fear the censorate will impeach you tomorrow for elevating a concubine and neglecting your wife. Song Mingxuan slumped to the ground as if his spine had been removed. I suddenly noticed the sachet I embroidered for him last Qixi festival hanging from his waist. The silk threads depicting the mandarin ducks were already frayed and worn. A choked sob escaped his throat.
Yun, can we please go home? I will send Ruyan away, and we can adopt Bao'er into another branch of the family.
I threw the blood-stained handkerchief onto his face, and then I shall wait for a 4th or a 5th Lu Ruyan. Marquis, I find you disgusting. As the silk fabric fluttered before his eyes, Song Mingxuan desperately scrambled to grab it like a madman. A eunuch kicked him hard in the chest. Coughing up bloody foam, he still tried to crawl forward.
Your Majesty, my wife and I are merely having a domestic dispute. I shook open the divorce decree.
Song Mingxuan, the night you taught your Bao'er to write the character for family, did you have any idea how my heart ached? He froze like a stone statue. I pressed my blood-stained thumbprint onto the silk document. From this day forward, no matter how many people you draw in your family portrait, it has absolutely nothing to do with me. I stepped over his disheveled jade belt, hearing the muffled whimpers squeezing out of his throat.
Yun, you were never like this before.
You are mistaken, Marquis. I have always been this way. You simply never saw me clearly. Song Mingxuan stumbled forward and grabbed my sleeve.
Madam, do not act out of anger. Aren't you making this scene just to make me change my mind? I will send Ruyan to the manor tomorrow. What more do you want?
And then? Wait for her to give birth, and then bring the child back to be registered under my name? Just like when you promised me you would never take a concubine in this lifetime? Seeing that I would not relent, Song Mingxuan turned to the emperor and said,
Your Majesty, please do not mind her. She has always been generous and magnanimous. She even personally distributes porridge to the refugees. How could she not tolerate a single child?
The emperor wiped his teacup, his half-smiling gaze sweeping across Song Mingxuan's pale face.
Minister Song, your way of managing your household is far more interesting than your way of managing the waters. Lady Shen, the reward you requested, we grant it.
The night wind swept the divorce decree past the layered eaves. I looked at the swaying shadows of the trees on the vermilion walls, suddenly remembering what Shen Zhao had said in the ancestral hall on the day I transmigrated. This world does not allow women to remain sober. In that case, we shall become the sharpest of blades. On the 3rd day after I moved into the small courtyard in the south of the city, Song Mingxuan arrived, treading through the morning dew. He leaned against a crooked jujube tree, the dark circles under his eyes looking like smudged ink.
Yun, the scent of sweet osmanthus in your courtyard is just like the one at the Marquis's manor.
I lowered my head to prune the dead branches. Amidst the clicking sound of the shears, he suddenly grabbed my wrist.
Yesterday, Bao'er had a high fever and went into convulsions. He kept calling for his mother. Yun, he must be missing you.
I shook off his hand. The Marquis must be confused. Miss Liu is Bao'er's mother.
But you promised to teach me how to make kites. On my birthday last year, you said you'd embroider a 12 zodiac sachet for me. Tell me.
I snapped a stray, crooked branch. I have said many things. You also said you would never look at another woman in this lifetime. Why does the Marquis only choose to remember the pleasant words? He stumbled back half a step, the oil paper parcel in his arms falling open, revealing the dragon's beard candy I used to love.
Yun, this is your favorite.
The sugar threads snapped one by one in the morning light. I gave a soft laugh. Marquis, I stopped liking these a long time ago. On the day, Liu Ruyan came to my door. I was transcribing notes on water conservancy. Supporting her 5-month pregnant belly, she stepped over the threshold, her gold-embroidered shoes deliberately trampling the bamboo sieve where I was drying herbs.
You certainly seem at leisure now, madam. The Marquise gets drunk every night and calls out your name. Are you satisfied now?
I dipped my brush in the ink. Miss Liu, you should address me as Miss Shen. She suddenly flipped over the inkstone on my desk.
Stop pretending to be so pure. Since you don't want him anymore, why are you still keeping his soul hooked? Do you know what he called out last night while choking me by the neck? He called out your name.
And
So, you must die. Only when you are dead will the Marquise finally see me and our child.
she poked her red-painted fingernail toward my heart. I grabbed her wrist and twisted it back. Miss Liu, I am now a water conservancy official appointed by His Majesty. Do you know that murdering an imperial official is far more serious than murdering the Marquise's wife? She suddenly threw herself against the corner of the table, and blood began to trickle down her forehead. The moment the wooden door was kicked open, Liu Ruyan collapsed weakly into Song Mingxuan's arms.
Ruyan only came to beg sister to return. Who knew sister would suddenly go mad?
Song Mingxuan's hand hovered over her blood-stained collar, but his gaze was pinned firmly on my face.
Yun, I know you hate me, but the child in Ruyan's womb.
I picked up the scattered medicinal herbs from the floor. Perhaps the Marquis should smell the powder on her sleeve. It is an excellent remedy for stopping bleeding and dispersing bruises. Miss Liu is indeed well prepared. Liu Ruyan's sobbing stopped abruptly. Song Mingxuan suddenly forced open her tightly clenched fists. Under the sunlight, her fingernails stained with medicinal powder had nowhere to hide. His voice sounded as cold as ice.
Ruyan.
Liu Ruyan grabbed the hem of his robe. Marquis, let me explain.
It was Bauer who said he wanted his father. So
The matter of you poisoning Yun 3 days ago. Did you truly think I did not know?
Song Mingxuan flung her hand away. A guard presented a packet of arsenic.
The cook has already confessed.
Liu Ruyan's face turned as pale as ash. I laughed aloud as I looked at Song Mingxuan's trembling fingertips. The Marquis plays his part brilliantly. You have played both the good cop and the bad cop all by yourself. With bloodshot eyes, he suddenly stepped closer. It is not a play.
I dealt with her the very day I returned from the palace. Yun, come home with me.
I picked up the rolled-up records and tapped them against his chest. Song Mingxuan, you can never distinguish what is truly important. When Liu Ruyan poisoned me, you turned a blind eye and remained silent. Who are you putting on this show of deep affection for now? Flustered, he reached out to grab my fingertips.
Trust me one last time.
Liu Ruyan suddenly rushed forward like a madwoman to claw at me.
this is all your fault. If you hadn't been seducing the Marquise.
Song Mingxuan slapped her to the ground.
Enough. Someone, come here. Send Lady Liu to the manor.
Liu Ruyan covered her face and shrieked with laughter.
Song Mingxuan, back then, you were the one who said you would give me and the child a home.
A nest built on lies scatters as soon as the wind blows. Song Mingxuan suddenly rushed out the door. A moment later, he returned carrying a clay jar. He lifted the red cloth. Inside was the jar of nuptial wine from our wedding.
Yun, look. The clay seal isn't even broken. Let's drink the nuptial wine again and pretend none of this ever happened.
I lifted the clay jar and smashed it onto the ground. The wine seeped into the cracks of the blue bricks. Have you ever heard a saying, Marquise? Belated sincerity is cheaper than grass. He knelt among the scattered shards, trying to gather the broken pieces. Blood mixed with the spilled wine, drenching his hands.
It can be pieced back together, Yun. It can be pieced back together.
I stepped on that sharp clay shard. Hoping to mend a broken mirror is a fool's dream. It is time to wake up, Marquise. When Shen Zhao threw the fire starter into the Shi family ancestral hall, I was in the courtyard drying the blueprints for the women's school. I watched the ancestral tablets curling in the soaring flames. Are you really going to burn it, sister? The Shi family's century-old legacy. She threw her patent of nobility into the sea of fire.
What does a century-old legacy have to do with me? They locked me up for half my life with the chastity archway, so I will grant them a rebirth through fire.
When Shen Yun rushed over, the beams and pillars were crackling and snapping as they broke. His eyes nearly splitting with rage, he grabbed Shen Zhao by the collar.
You madwoman. Do you have any idea that my Shi family is a prominent clan of 100 years?
Shen Zhao smiled as she pried his fingers away.
Why don't you take a look, General Shi? Will this fire burn all the way to concubine Yu's golden Phoebe woodbed?
You, what about me? She slapped the divorce papers against his chest.
From this day forward, whether you take 80 concubines or raise 100 illegitimate children,
The sea of fire reflected a crimson glow in her eyes.
none of it has anything to do with me, Shen Zhao.
On the day the women's school opened, I burned all the copies of commandments for women. Today we begin a new lesson. We will teach astrology, water conservancy, and teach you to see what this world truly looks like. Song Mingxuan huddled under the jujube tree at the street corner, peeking in,
Yun, you would rather teach these commoners to read.
then returned to the marquise's manor. I dipped my brush in ink and wrote the plaque declaring that women should be independent. Without looking up, I said, "The commoners the marquise speaks of saved the drowning legitimate daughter of the vice minister of works 3 days ago." He suddenly grabbed my hand, holding the brush.
What if I resign from office to help you run the school? I shook him off.
And then let Liu Ruyan disguise herself as a cook to sneak in. Song Mingxuan, you cannot even balance the accounts for water conservancy. What could you possibly teach them? The art of taking wives and concubines? He stumbled backward, knocking over the inkstone, and said hoarsely, "You will regret this." I watched his panicked, retreating figure, recalling the secret report from the censorate 3 days ago. Into whose pockets did the funds for repairing the southern dikes actually go? When the emperor pushed the teacup in front of me, the scent of ambergris blended with the bitterness of pre-rain Longjing tea. His fingertips tapped on the water conservancy notes.
The memorial to banish Song Mingxuan to the northern desert has been held by us for 3 months. Does our beloved subject think he should be punished?
I stared at the word corruption on the memorial and smiled faintly. Your Majesty has long since uncovered the truth about the adulterated river sand. Why wait for me to speak? He suddenly leaned forward. What if we say?
We were waiting for you to say he deserves death.
As thunder crashed outside the hall, I steadily picked up my teacup. Your Majesty is a wise ruler and will naturally act according to the law. He laughed aloud and stood up.
Shen Yun, your eyes see through things too clearly. It makes us.
The second half of his sentence was lost in the rustling sound of the vermilion brush sealing the decree. He suddenly turned around.
Shen Yun, why do you think we kept you here until curfew? Those officials from the censorate say that women participating in politics will surely throw the court into chaos.
I raised my eyes to meet his gaze. Have those ministers ever said anything new? When they cursed my elder sister for being rebellious back then, they used these exact words. He suddenly smiled faintly.
What if we permit you to enter the Ministry of Works?
I took half a step back, Your Majesty. This humble woman only wishes to walk into the Ministry of Works with dignity. I traced the rim of the teacup. Has Your Majesty ever seen, when the yellow river dikes burst, women using wooden door panels to hold up their infants? They do not understand the commentary on the water classic, yet they can survive on instinct alone. His fingertips paused on the edge of the memorial.
Are you saying instinct is more important than learning?
This subject wishes to say that if women are allowed to study and understand reason, instinct can be transformed into strategies for governing the realm. Is that not precisely why Your Majesty kept me here today? The teacup clattered onto the desk. A genuine smile finally surfaced in his eyes.
Shen Yun, you are even bolder than the Grand Tutor.
I looked at the swaying shadows of the trees on the palace wall. Because this subject has nothing to ask for, I seek neither wealth nor power. I only ask that, when Your Majesty permits me to open the school, fewer imperial guards are sent to watch over us.
You noticed that long ago.
I dipped my finger in the cold tea and drew circles on the desk. I noticed on the third day. They always trample the herbs in my courtyard. Next time, they might want to change into soft-soled shoes. After a long silence, the young emperor sighed.
Very well. At tomorrow's morning court, we will excise this rot for you.
On the day Song Mingxuan left the capital, Liu Ruyan blocked the official road, holding her illegitimate son.
My lord, take me with you.
As Song Mingxuan's official boots sank into the mud, Liu Ruyan was grabbing the boy's collar and pushing him forward.
My lord, feel Bauer's hand. It is as cold as a block of ice. He was crying for his father last night until his voice went hoarse.
My salary has been halved. I cannot afford to feed idle people. Miss Liu might as well return to Zuixiang Pavilion and resume her old trade.
Liu Ruyan suddenly rushed forward, tearing at his robes.
Back then, you were the one who said you would redeem my freedom. You said Bao, or could become a legitimate young master. Why act so noble and pure now, when you held me and taught me how to write the word home?
Song Mingxuan stared at his reddened palm and sneered.
A rotten person is just a rotten person. Playing the role of a decent woman for 3 years cannot wash away the filth in your bones.
Liu Ruyan covered her face and laughed through her tears.
Yes, I am a rotten person, but what are you, my lord?
She suddenly tore open her collar, revealing bite marks on her collarbone.
Last month at the manor, when you were drunk and wild, who was the one biting me and crying out for Yin?
Song Mingxuan suddenly pinched her chin.
If you dare mention that name again, I will throw Bauer into the moat.
Liu Ruyan shoved the crying child into his arms.
Throw him then. He is of your Song family's blood anyway. Do you think your precious Yun would still care?
Song Mingxuan retreats in a hurry, shaking off the crying child as if he had been burned. With a hoarse voice, he kicked over the bamboo basket of dry rations.
Get out. If I ever see you again, I'll sell Bauer to human traffickers.
As the carriage passed the girls' academy, Song Mingxuan suddenly poked his head out, shouting something hoarsely. I heard him clearly, he said. Yun, I know I was wrong. Unfortunately, it was too late. When the emperor summoned me to the palace for the third time, Shen Zhao was in the courtyard teaching the female students how to tie knots. She held a cinnabar brush between her teeth.
His Majesty seems to have taken a liking to you. The Eastern pearls he bestowed yesterday are enough to buy half of Juke Street.
I smiled and shook my head. Sister, don't talk nonsense.
Then why did the Emperor keep you in the palace for another 2 hours just now?
To discuss the diversion of the Yellow River, she raised her eyebrows.
Diversion of the river, all the way into the Hall of Mental Cultivation. The other day, I saw him staring at the notes you bound, with such a light in his eyes.
I covered her mouth. What I want is freedom, not another golden cage.
Yun, can we really change this world?
I pulled out my golden hairpin and drew a circle on the ground. When human ancestors discovered how to make fire by friction, did they ever think that one day people would build nuclear power plants? We didn't come here to adapt to this era. I held her scarred wrist. We came to light the spark.